the next step, as I understand, is Monday, December 5th at 4:30 p.m. in room 317, City Hall, where you can attend the Planning Commission meeting. There's a link that I'll put in the chat that gets you to the meeting minutes that will also give you the agenda 1 week ahead of that meeting for all the materials and also the staff report. And then finally, the staff is mailing Smith. So you can find her email. We'll also put that in the chat. And it is planned 15521 for your reference. And so that would be the next opportunity to take to further the conversation beyond this meeting. So any other thoughts before I hand it over? I'm always looking for Becky's thumbs up. Awesome. All right. So I'm not quite sure who on the team wants to take over. I assume you're better at Zoom than I might be. And thank you, Katie.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Excellent, thanks. I am working between two screens here, so that's why I kind of look off to one side. I have some notes and as well as our presentation, which is on the screen. But Bjorn, thank you so much for that introduction. I want to start by introducing myself. I'm Katie Blaisdell. I'm with Kreileich Architects. Some of you may know our firm. We're based here in Minneapolis. And we've been working with one of the co-developers, John Gross, who's also on the call for many, many years. And John is working with Tony Johannes in the neighborhood on the project that we'd like to talk to you about tonight. So what we would like to do is, as Bjorn mentioned, is that this is really hopefully a session that we can use as an informational session. We've been working through concept development with John and his team to kind of ideate about what's possible on the site. And it's something we'd like to take forward to the city because we feel like we're at a very good place. But we'd also like to be active listeners. We know that all of you have a great stake or stakehold in your neighborhood. And it's something that, you know, we want to also hear from you on kind of what is possible on this site. So as Bjorn mentioned, I want to kind of set the stage that, again, this is kind of an informational presentation. We don't require any variances for the project or won't be requesting any. And so really what we don't necessarily require action or a request specifically for this committee, but we just want to be able to share the project and be good neighbors. And then I also want to just highlight that the proposed project is adjacent to what is known as the commercial building. And so that is a project that's located at the corner of 43rd and Upton at 4300. That is currently home to the New Guild Jewelers business. And I just wanted to highlight that that's kind of our most, the project is directly adjacent to that building. And so CPED went ahead and looked at that and determined that this, through historic review, this building is not a contributing property. And so it's not identified as a historic resource, but that project will remain, but we won't be going through the historic process. So that I think is something to clarify, especially in this neighborhood where you do have some great historic building stock. So with that, I'll kind of jump in. I'm going to walk through a slide of presentations here, and then John would like to say a few words at the tail end of the presentation, and then we will certainly turn it over to public comment and question.
Hey, this is Alex, my resident. Could we actually start, John, could you just give some context to, you know, the impetus for this project, and before we jump into Kreileich's presentation?
Oh, absolutely, sure. Katie, do you have the sort of the image 3/4 that shows the corner existing building and then the Zumbro section?
Yes.
Yeah. Here we go. Right there, that 8B photo is, I think, the easiest way to kind of look at that. If that could be enlarged in any way, Katie, I don't know. But as a background, my name is John Gross, and I'm a developer, and I'm also in hospitality. Have co-founded many, many restaurants and own those buildings along with my business partner, Tony Johannes. And we're both longtime residents of the neighborhood. Tony now lives in the North Loop, but he was born and raised in Linden Hills, and I've been in Linden Hills for 30 years. But in terms of anything significant, it's been the kind of adaptive reuse projects we've done in Linden Hills. So just as giving the context here, slightly down the street, we took the old Bear Hardware, which was old. Everyone said tear it down. It was structurally insufficient, but renovated that to make it first Upton 43, which we were partners in that restaurant, and then Martina. We then went on to do Colita, and then Rosalia, Cafe Cirrus, all of which were in our own buildings that we renovated and I designed in conjunction on the interiors. And then the businesses in there, we co-own those with our chef partner, Danny Del Prado, until last December, in which he bought us out. And so we all worked together well on that. This particular project was a tricky one because when we bought it, we knew there'd be some structural work, and we spent $350,000 just shoring up that front corner from underneath because the building was sagging from the weight of those billboards, but also this used to be a swamp. And so, at that early stage, Tony and I discussed the project overall and said, we want to save as much of this old fabric as we can. And so what you see on this photo that is white is the part that was really kind of an insane amount of money, but just to kind of keep it, we wanted to do that and thought we could keep the Zumbro section, but we've gone through that very intensively, and that's that yellow section and then the little black screen porch. And it was built as a lean-to, just a one-story lean-to. So they didn't even do it structurally correct in the beginning. They just kind of attached it to the white building. But then someone said, you know what, we've got that upper area, let's just add some apartments there. And they didn't do that correctly. That undermined it structurally. And then Zumbro or somebody before we had the building removed some of the structural columns within, and it's a we love a challenge with restoring an old building. It's like, this has got to go. So we had talked with Neil and Barb about, you've been here forever, we love you, everybody loves you, what do you want to do, what is your future? And that's always a challenging question for a restaurant. They've been on a month-to-month lease for years, and we're fine with that. So what we've done and what we're showing you is a development in which we basically just build a new building where the yellow building is. There's a small retail space on the main level, and then adjacent to it, there's a core that has an elevator that will then give ADA access to the white building from the basement, main floor, the second floor, and ADA access for the new building. And the rest of it will be office space. Zumbro would come back in and take that 800 square foot space. And so they'd have a pretty much almost the same size restaurant, but a much larger patio. And what you'll see is the design is such that those 4 Rosalia parking spaces will become an outdoor patio, but there'll still be a walkway, of course, back to Rosalia, and you'll have, like kind of like a 3-level patio, basically a street level one next to what is this main level space, and then you have the wall, and then you have the Rosalia patio. So I was gonna, wait till the end of the presentation to say this, but it is such a honor to be able to work with Snow Kreileich, because they truly are just one of the most phenomenal design firms in the nation, and they're world renowned for their work, and they usually work on much, much bigger projects. So Tony and I feel very fortunate to have their level of detail and attention to kind of beautiful design, understated design in a project in this community, which is the thing we have always wanted to do and wanted to bring forth.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Great. Yeah, that's a great introduction. Thank you, John. That sets the stage really well. So I maybe don't need to go into the specifics of some of the zoning analysis. It's certainly something that I'm ready and willing to speak to as we go here, because I think it sets up how we've been thinking about the scale of the project on the site. But I'll just summarize this by saying that we understand we're in a neighborhood commercial district. We want to be able to hold up what has kind of historically been encouraged in this neighborhood, the small kind of neighborhood scale development, but still provide a space, kind of a refurbished, like new reinvigorated space for Zumbro to come back, and then also be able to provide that new asset of a small scale office space on the levels above that John mentioned. So, you know, being within that commercial district, that's something that we feel would be very valuable. We also understand that we're within this pedestrian overlay district. And so that is guiding some of the other decisions that have been made on the project. And that, from a zoning standpoint, will primarily, you'll see that this primarily sets up where we step back the project, how we set up the scale, and how we really make the project feel appropriate to the pedestrian and to the street level experience. The other piece that I'll say here is that that, as John mentioned, we are building a new terrace in place of the 4 parking stalls that are on site for Rosalia today. And so since there are no minimum parking requirements, that is something that would be permitted on the site, but something that we certainly want to be aware of. So as we look back, we wanted to share a little bit of some of the concept work that we prepared for the project. And being in the pedestrian overlay district, certainly knowing that we are kind of a really critical intersection within Linden Hills, we wanted to be able to set up a scale of building that felt appropriate and also felt comfortable to the pedestrian walking along the street. And so this idea of how we treat the first level, or what we're calling the plinth, I think it really sets up what's the feel of the project overall. You'll see as we click through the project as well, John described a new terrace, covered terrace that's being integrated in the project. And that will actually serve double duty. It'll be a covered terrace for the adjacent restaurant space, but it will also serve as a portal back to the Rosalia patio. And so the idea being that we can certainly pull pedestrians in from the street by coming through that kind of enriched space. And then as a part of the pedestrian overlay within this area, with a slightly taller building, we are required and interested in stepping back the top floor. And so you'll see that in the renderings as well, that top floor will step back 10 feet from this primary building facade, so that it will help bring down the overall feeling and scale of the building. I think it makes it feel more appropriately scaled for the street that it's on. But it also allows for some terrace at that level, opening up the daylight in view so that we're not casting unnecessary shadow, that sort of thing. So this is that section that John is referencing as he's talking through kind of how we are pulling people in through the street, from the street. We have some existing photos below of the corner, and you kind of see the delineation line of where the existing building will stay and the portion of the building that would be replaced, as well as that parking lot, which I think right now is almost a gap in the street elevation, just to have parking stalls directly off of the street face. So there's some potential there that we felt like we could activate that and provide an asset where that parking lot is maybe a little lacking at the moment. And so the idea being that we had this continuity of pedestrian experience to go from sidewalk to covered terrace in that portal that's being carved through the building back to the Rosalia courtyard beyond, that you see kind of in this middle bottom photo. I'll just jump back one. As I mentioned too, that carve at the upper level is very intentional to be able to draw back the building scale on the northern side on 43rd And then also, since this is a slightly taller building, it does help with the overall shadow cast. So this is just a quick analysis from our team on the shading study throughout the year. So the summer solstice is cast at the top of the page, the spring and what would also be fall equinox in the middle of the page, and then the winter solstice. And really just this quickly demonstrates that even though we're looking at a slightly taller structure here, for much of the year, the shadow isn't cast beyond to the opposite side of the street. So we're drawing inspiration from many areas, but this is a spread of a few different images that we've referenced throughout the course of concept design. And really, I think what we're starting to see here is that we're interested in this kind of refinement or restrained palette that we can explore, even if this is a natural material like brick. We're looking at projects from all over the world, frankly, but we've also referenced a few projects in our own neighborhood. So in the upper right here is that building that's at the corner at 4300, at where New Guild is located. And then this other project to the left, so second in here, is also a modern project that's come to the neighborhood more recently. That's LH44, so the apartments that are closer to the lake. And this is, although I think we have a number of fantastic historic masonry structures in the neighborhood to reference that are very traditional in their nature, we are looking to take a certain approach of a modern interpretation of a historic brick structure. And so we reference LH44 just because I think this palette of kind of a light tone, very quiet in tone and palette, that quietness of the brick, I think is something that we're interested in. And the Glengarry brick that was used at LH44 is, I think, a really approachable palette and something that I think felt like a good reference that is in line with some of these other projects we're referencing. So this is the palette for the project itself, and you can see that kind of applied on the enlarged elevation on the right. So light tone masonry is something that we are interested in exploring. We see that kind of used in a couple of different ways. And so in the middle field, you see that applied as a more traditional running bond with also a soldier bond, which is a more vertical orientation of the brick at the floor levels to kind of delineate those floor levels and give the facade a little bit of articulation and movement with the brick. Because I think the detail of that and the kind of subtlety of the detail of how we change the orientation of the brick and the coursing of it, I think there's a lot of beauty in that texture. It's something that we're interested in exploring. For the primary material at the street though, we are interested in something that is relatively tactile and feels kind of earthen. And so this could be achieved in a couple of different ways and be a nice complement to that brick. And so we could look at a precast architectural concrete, which has a stain or a slight texture to it. The other way that we see that done is to use more of like a stucco finish that would then be in kind of cast in a similar tone to the brick that would be selected. And that smoothness, I think, supports some of these other architectural moves that we're pursuing, which would be kind of a rounding and easing of some of these edges at the entry and at the portal that really tries to soften this streetscape at level 1 so that this feels like a very welcoming kind of polished portion of the building. And then we actually use that same material at the top floor where the building is recessed or set back by 10 feet. That would be shown here and then also across the first floor here. And then I'll just jump back for the kind of third material we're highlighting here is a bronze anodized aluminum, and that would be essentially any other detail for the project. So that would be window frames, door frames, and certainly the canopy that we're looking at above the primary entry and then above the portal for the project. So you see that kind of applied here in the overall rendering of this north side of the project. And I think that as a material, it has a softness to it as well, and something that feels like it kind of can be a special material without being kind of too overwhelming. In this image, I think you can also get a nice view looking back through the portal to that Rosalia courtyard. And this is a rendered site plan to help describe that pedestrian experience. Again, kind of trying to draw in from the street and create one kind of flow of covered terrace, which would be the portal underneath the building here, and in the courtyard beyond. This is the space that John is describing on level 1 that is essentially the footprint of the Zumbro Cafe today. This would be the space that would be turned over to cafe space or a restaurant in the future, with a kind of link between that space and the existing building to be able to bring in a new elevator and new stair, provide egress for that building and bring that building up to code. So you see that in a little bit more detail in the first level plan. Again, a comparable size to the existing Zumbro at level 1, but that elevator located here. And I'll just jump through the plans above. We are right now in the stage of only working on the core and the shell of the building. So we won't get into the level of detail of delineating how many offices or how they would be occupied just yet. We have 3 stories of office above. But I believe, John can speak to this as well, but I believe the idea is to be able to have a small scale office tenants occupying this space so that we can provide an asset for the neighborhood that may not exist today. And again, at the top floor, seeing that terrace, utilizing that step back as a terrace on this floor for the tenant and being able to bring down the scale of the building at this floor. We have some line work elevations just to help demonstrate the shade and shadow on the exterior of the building. And you see a little bit of that articulation of the facade where the windows and doors are stepped back at the upper floor and at the level 1. And a few additional views of the project here. So this would be looking back towards the intersection of 43rd and Upton. So looking east, slightly down 43rd. This would be an elevation of the south, come from the south. So from the Rosalia courtyard, what would you see? You, of course, would have access to that restaurant space at level 1, and then we would be providing plenty of natural light and air for the office space above. And you get a small peek of the eastern side of the project here, looking the other direction down 43rd. So we have kind of a play of some openings on this elevation as well to be able to bring some light and views into that stair core and some of the office space. And the other piece, you know, on the elevation that faces the hardware store today, of course, because it is closer to the lot line, would not be permitted to have openings per se, but certainly we're playing with the articulation of the brick on that elevation to avoid having any blank facades and to meet the city ordinance that speaks directly to that. So I'll end here and maybe just pause on this image of the northern view one more time, just to be able to look at the overview of the project. And I can turn it over, John, to you if you had anything else you wanted to add.
No, Katie, thank you. That was beautiful work that you and the firm have done, and just a wonderful presentation. One thing, the entry into the elevator vestibule on the left and then kind of coming in from the right, those are both curved in, right?
Yes, yeah, great.
Incredible sort of intrigue and softness with that. And then the retail, which we call the retail, but it would be Zumbro's, would have their own door. They would not go in through the where the one person is standing. That's kind of just for going up to the office. So the Zumbro would have their own door in their facade, and then they would have doors that go out to that patio on the right. And the patio doesn't go all the way. There's still a nice, generous sidewalk that leads back to the Rosalia sidewalks.
Right. Yep. All great points. But as you mentioned, the idea here is that you would be able to have some operability along the wall that's essentially behind where my cursor is here, so that there would be some flow of interior to exterior space, so that really this could be utilized as an extension of the Zumbro space.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, Well, thank you both, John and Katie, for the presentation and for talking about your project. We have a number of questions in the chat if you've been following along, so I'll do my best to kind of transcribe them. If you pick up some side pieces, that's great. I
Sure.
think the basically the biggest question I think out there is parking. That's the number one. Could you talk more about parking, maybe in context of the small area plan, if you're familiar, as well as um, impact on businesses and what you might be thinking of yourselves for parking for your tenants there as well. It's certainly always been a huge topic in the neighborhood and will continue to be for a long time, I
Yeah,
suspect.
thank you. Tony and I had the early discussions with the church, which then you had those 25 spaces that Martina leased so that they could have guests parked there. But recently been talking with the church about trying to find a way to utilize some of their upper level spaces during the week when they're not using those, and they were very open to a discussion about that. Tony and I have also spoken with Mark Settigren about the idea of us paying for a parking gate system so that his clients could park at no charge, and then those who wanted to come by the hour for retail and those things could pay. And he has to think about that, but he wasn't close to it. He wasn't certain that could work. We're talking along those lines. And so that's kind of it. I mean, it's an urban neighborhood. It's the city that directs the policy. I mean, the neighborhood absolutely inputs on that, but the city changes the zoning. When we were doing projects 7 years ago here, I don't think we could have done anything until we had, dozens and dozens of parking spaces, and they changed that, which then allowed more to happen. And it's there's a great share of folks that live in the neighborhood, and there's a great amount of parking. I think it's just getting kind of organized about how to allocate that, but it's also important to remember that some of the space is private space, such as such as Settigren, such as the one next to Jones and Navia and things like that. I mean, it basically all mostly is private, but it's worked well to share. So I think I don't have a perfect solution, but I think from a developer point of view, I've always felt it's very important. So Tony and I have always, right from the start, paid to get parking secured so that it would be a benefit for our potential tenants. So it's not anything we would just kind of leave idle. We would work on it and have serious discussions with those who do have private parking to see if there's anything we could work out, and there should be able to be something.
Okay. I think it from my perspective, I lived in Europe for a while, Schaffhausen, Switzerland, and I lived inside the medieval walls, and I found that it was actually the parking ramp that they put in the 1950s and dug a giant hole and made a plaza out of it that was the lifeblood of the whole community. And that parking issue really allows all these small businesses and allows all the I don't know, the typical things that we've come to know and love to continue to exist. And more pressure on that, I think, at some point is a little bit of a blind eye. I think that you're right, John. It's a city issue that we need to take up and address at certain levels. I would absolutely, though, support or encourage, and I think most folks here on the call, uh, you know, to create actual solutions for everyone for parking and being a active champion and partner for parking solutions in Linden Hills, whatever that might mean, I think is a valuable resource and asset for everyone. I'd be curious if I don't actually think I'm representing the spirit and the feelings of this parking issue Well, so if there is someone that would like to ask these questions directly, maybe Stephanie or something, I'd be happy to let you have the floor and talk through that a little bit. Stephanie, are you able to, or?
I am more than happy to.
Sure.
My concern is that a lot of the parking is privatized, and when reading the small area plan, which I understand the committee is, created with massive amounts of volunteer time, the spirit of that plan is really to help preserve, protect, support the small businesses in the community and maintain the historic nature and vibe of the area. And parking has been privatized even more so with the alley, the old trolleyway having signs for this business only, for that business only. And it's really hurting and negatively impacting the smaller independent businesses in the area. And I think we all have this ethic of everyone's going to take a bus, everyone's going to walk, everyone's going to bike. But the reality is we're not there. And for some of these smaller businesses to survive, these historic ones that are the highlight of the small area plan, they depend on the fact that there's parking. And my concern is that with an office use is 8.5 hours a day. And so folks it's not a turn. It's not getting a cup of coffee and leaving. It's not buying a necklace and leaving. It's people that are there for the duration of the day. So even if they're parking down the trolleyway, they're there for 8-9 hours. And that negatively impacts all these businesses that the small area plan has a goal of trying to preserve and protect.
I could speak to that a little bit. I think those are all good points. A couple of different things though. I think the very nature of a village it's more than just retail. I don't think the healthiest places are all just retail. You do have office. It's a mix. There's people who are there, they have clients, those clients do go out, eat. So as do the office folks, as do the nearby residential folks. I don't think necessarily they should be counted out of the equation, and that they're there 8 hours a day. Tilia, Martina, Navia, they're really hitting their stride when all of those folks are leaving. So you have sort of a fluctuation. I think the issue is when, how do we do this thing? And I believe, Stephanie, you work for the city of Edina, and Edina was brilliant about that at 50th and France. Tony and I used to have a building on 49th and a half. And we were like, oh God, what is this extra line item on our taxes? And it was this village tax, basically, 50th and France village tax. And what it was paying for the 3 ramps that were built that were free to all of the people who worked there and who were, in offices, shopping, doing whatever they were doing. And it was such a value when it came right down to it, because it might have been, I don't know, $8,000 a year, which seemed like a lot, but when you broke it down on a per day for our tenants, it was so inexpensive yet so valuable. So I think there was a role for the neighborhood to take a serious look and say, well, look, there is a lot of private space. Is there anything we as a business community, not us, the business owners, but the city itself or Linden Hills neighborhood, that could come up with something along those lines where they create the parking, they get the revenue, they get the bond, and all boats rise. So it's not simple, and I don't mean to just toss it off. I do know that Tony and I have always taken it seriously. It's part of our economic success is having access to it. It's a market-driven thing. We have that, and actually when we have done that in the past, people get angry, even though they were, not doing it, and it was open to anybody to lease the spaces. But we feel that it's important to do that. And when we leased the spaces, we maintained the spaces, we paid all the other things that went along with it. But we thought it was essential if we were going to have a business, even though we didn't need to have the parking by the letter of the law, it would be a smart thing to do. And so it's just an extra cost, but I think it's an important one.
I think as a council too, trying to figure out what those next steps are, and particularly finding the right partners in order to answer that question about parking. I think that's something that we need to come together on to discuss and describe as well. So maybe more on that we can put it on our agenda for next meeting as well. But it's something that comes up quite regularly, and trying to understand the ownership and responsibility and trying to take that next step to help everyone is an important one. Particularly in
Hey,
a time
can
of-
I ask you a question? This
Yeah.
is Ian Harrison. I'm a newbie to the council as of like 2 days ago.
Awesome, Ian.
And my office is located right above Great Harvest. I park basically illegally every day. And I'm thankful that the business owners in the neighborhood probably recognize my car enough they don't tow me. So thank you guys. Thanks, Martina and everybody else for not towing me every day. I have a question. The large parking lot to the north, behind the newer apartment buildings and behind Jones Coffee, John probably knows this. Who owns that large surface parking lot?
I believe that's Linen Hills Dentistry. Is that what you mean? Like up?
It's
up
the
up
big
there?
surface parking lot that is north of the newer apartment buildings on the corner of Sheridan and 43rd.
Yeah, north of Bremer in the Callahan
Yes.
framing or something like that. Yeah, I believe that is Linen Hills Dentistry owns
That
that
entire
lot.
parking lot is owned by the dentistry.
Yes.
Interesting. John, I want to thank you for bringing up the situation you had in Edina. I think that's fascinating. I think that's something the village possibly could explore as well. I've always been just perplexed why there isn't a garage in the neighborhood for people to park rather than trying to fight for a spot or contend or roll the dice like I do every day and park illegally just so I can go to work. It's always been very fascinating to me. But I put in the comments that this is an absolutely gorgeous building. I get it. I hunted for office space 2 years ago, couldn't find much that was within a budget that made sense. And was able to find a wonderful landlord and a wonderful spot with great co-tenants. But it's one of those things that, we just sat through the mapping prejudice project. And it's just fascinating to me that we're talking about this right now, right after we just sat through that, where I feel as though candidly Fulton and Linden Hills is becoming whiter and more affluent and exclusionary. I understand why this project is proposed, and I think it's gorgeous, and I think it would look wonderful in the neighborhood, but maybe this is something that I should be meeting with our council people about to discuss. But I just have to ask ourselves, what do we want to do? Where do we want to go? I'll jump off.
Yeah, Ian, I think that's a great point, a great conversation. At least I personally feel similarly. It's in this time and in this place, what kind of stand and mark are we making as an opportunity? And I think I don't know the answer to that, right? And I don't know that anyone knows the answer to that, but I don't know. I guess I'd be curious to hear from the design team and developer their thoughts on this translation about equity and place in the neighborhood, and what that means for you.
Yeah, I think that's a very big issue. It's an issue that crosses all of us, anyone on this, Zoom that's still on the Zoom. And how do we do that in our own lives, and how do we do something collectively? My feeling on that is the thing that can't be done, isn't fair to do, is to have a city that spends an enormous amount of time and process creating zoning laws and new laws and everything else. They're complicated. And then says, okay, this is the set of codes and laws by which you can do something, and they're not easy, and it's not something you just kind of stumble into. So you say, okay, we as developers in this neighborhood who care about this neighborhood, who want to bring value to this neighborhood in terms of transforming what was one thing and activating it socially and economically into something else, and also physically and architecturally. So when we do that, we are following the laws that are set by the city. So when the neighborhood says, hey, can you make this, would the request say, make this affordable office space? Would you, any of those kind of things? It's not possible, but it is possible if things are set that way from the beginning, because it wouldn't be us doing this. It would be someone who has the experience doing this. And it's a whole different way of going about it, but it's not something you can just sort of change. I mean, you could do it if you were a billionaire, just say, yeah, let's just make this into what? I don't know. And then on the other side of that, the intent of wanting to do that often isn't even accepted, where it's like, well, that's great, but we don't want to have, a relief center here or some other thing, a social service organization. You may not, and that's the other challenge. But most importantly, the market is where the market is. So we could either not do anything and let these things kind of just deteriorate into the ground, and Zumbro collapses in on itself, and it's just sort of like, hey, we can't do anything because it costs too much. Or there is a real city input that says, no, we got this. We're changing this, and we're also giving the resources to make that possible. Like you have low-income housing tax credits, you have those kind of facilities to make those things possible, but those are a completely specific thing, and there's a way that they organize that. And so the group needs to figure out what they want first, and then how to have it actually implemented into the law and into the resources so that they can achieve those things.
Alex, why don't you go ahead there? We're running out of time here, so I've got one question and then more of a technical question at the end to kind of close out. But Alex, I see your hand up, so I'll take that moment.
Thank you. What are the things that you've put in place to address the building's impact to the climate? Will this building be net zero, LEED?
I don't think we've done our MEP workup. Katie, can you comment on that?
Yeah, that's right. So I will say that we are still relatively early in the design process. While we have started to think about the ways that we might be able to shape the design in that way, I would say that there's still a lot of room to grow. So for instance, when we're this early and we're setting up a project of this scale, we started to ask some questions about some of the primary systems. So where we'd like to start with, say, the structural system, we look at comparing say like a mass timber structure to a concrete to a steel structure. And even if we move away from mass timber and we go to something like a concrete superstructure, what our office likes to do is take a step back and say, okay, how might we be able to impact that, even if we know that from a carbon standpoint, maybe not be the optimal option. We can look at the mix of that concrete. We might be able to make an impact there. The other thing that we'll do is we'll certainly look at the mechanical systems and understand, what are our options that we can explore that we might be able to see some higher efficiency. And we have not explored those yet. And so that is still on the table. I think there are a number of options that we could look at here. I think certainly on as many buildings as we can in our office, we're looking to electrify to the degree possible, because I think that's just the way the industry is moving. We want to see electrification where we can, full building electrification where we can.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. I guess, John, maybe the question is more for you. What kind of commitment are you willing to make about this building's impact to climate change?
Well, it's interesting. I think just by the nature of the function of the building itself, the intent, 80–90% of its occupants will be people who can walk from the neighborhood. And that might sound like, it's just, a clever answer, but it's not. The way this thing is designed and being able to have small offices, which was the directive right from the start of the design, and there was months and months and months spent on this design, allows small office users, of which, oh my God, there's zillions in Southwest Minneapolis, but in particular in Linden Hills. And so building this way, so that it could be up to, I don't know, however many people are not driving out to the suburbs or to downtown or whatever, is of great impact itself. And then to whatever degree we can, my God, have carbon neutral or do whatever we have to do to see those things. And they change a lot and we explore them over time, and some work and some never work. I'm working on a huge boutique hotel in the North Loop, and now we're part of the Clearway Energy circulator, and that's a kind of a huge win. And Snow Kreileich is actually the shell architect for that, and so we do what we can when we can, but I can never commit. It's something that's very important to us, and we will do our best, and that it will get defined more as we go. And there's phenomenal programs out there to especially help small buildings, small businesses like us do a good job. So it's important to us.
Thank you.
Thanks for that as well, Alex and John. I would push much harder on that topic and that issue. I again, if this is the best that we can do, the embodied carbon of this building looks very intense on the offset, despite our best abilities to get carbon-free steel and carbon-free concrete and things of that nature. I think it can go a lot farther out there. So I guess I would point to other standards as well. And I mean, if this building were replicated infinite times, I think we'd be, a few degrees off of where we want to be, despite how good it looks. So I would push harder on that. And to the question of equity, I think that's also one to take a harder stand on. Because I think that is a little bit about the tone of the neighborhood that's tried to create that diversity and that balance. Certainly, it's not a giant scale project that sort of overrides everything. I think this is another face of that, but I would continue to push that. There's a number of other questions that are probably going to go unanswered. So I would like to kind of comb through those and put them together to send to you, John. We tried to focus on topical questions so that we could leave some of the technical ones till last. So if that's okay with you, to send to your team kind of some questions. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
All right, great. And then maybe the last technical question here would be about combining the lots. Can you tell us what makes that possible, and any of your concerns there?
Yeah, maybe I could speak to that one. This is a process that we've been working with our city planner. As you mentioned, Bjorn, we're working with Mailing Smith on this project as our planner. And my understanding is that the combination of the lots is really an administrative feature to the project to be able to move forward with combined parcels to make this project possible. So I might have to jump back to the beginning of the presentation, but I think what that means is that anytime that we've been working through any stage of the land use application, we've been applying the principles of the project or all aspects of the lot, the combined parcel, to make sure that we're meeting all criteria on all buildings. So while some of the buildings, as for instance at 4300 or 4312, won't be touched as a part of this project, they're included in all of our calculations to meet the, site coverage, allowable density, that sort of thing. And so while the lot combination itself is really just kind of an administrative approval, everything else has been factored in as we move through the land use application.
Okay, great. I guess I could leave a moment of parting thoughts. If you all had seen and had your list of like 10 technical things to answer in 2 minutes and save an email, but otherwise, I think the next step for the project, as I said, is Monday, December 5th, City Hall, room 317. You can contact Mei Ling. I will try to, I guess that probably didn't get in the chat, but give me 1 second here. I can put some of that information in just so you all have it. And thank you all very much for attending tonight. I think there's a few pieces of the conversation that need to keep moving, one being parking, and continuing to kind of push the button on equity and sustainability in the neighborhood. And that I hope that we've kind of created an opportunity for communication. So opening that dialogue for what can create the best project for the neighborhood and for our planet, and also be conscious of everybody's abilities and rights and opportunities in that respect. So any other last comments or questions or thoughts? Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you for running a beautiful meeting. It was really, the first part was absolutely fascinating. I think we paled by comparison, but it's just a very well-run meeting, and thank you for the thoughtful way of going through all the questions.
Yeah, we appreciate the time. Thank you.
You.
Absolutely. All right. Have a great night all. Thank you.
Night.